G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you 3 simple exercises that you can do to help you combat the effects of sitting. One of the challenges about this modern world that we live in is that it asks us to sit so much throughout the day. And while one of the best ways to help you combat the effects of sitting is to not sit at all, but that can be unrealistic for so many people if you have to sit down at school or work, whether you're driving a taxi or driving a truck. And in a lot of ways, sitting is something that we have to do to complete a lot of the tasks that we need to do in our daily lives. So it's now become really important that if you can't optimize your sitting environment or regulate how often you have to sit for, then it's important that we give you some simple exercises that you can do to help you combat the effects of all the sitting that you might be forced to do. So let's get into it. So when looking at what exercises might be best at combating the effects of sitting, logically, we want to include things that combat some of the basic shapes and positions that sitting asks us to get into. And one of the main reasons why sitting can be so detrimental to the function of your body is its effect on the flexibility of your hips. We know that if you spend large amounts of time sitting with your hips at 90 degrees all day and you never explore the outer ranges of your hip in all its other directions, then your body can basically lose or shorten the available range of motion that you have. And while an exercise to improve your hip flexion is obviously very important, an exercise that goes after your ability to extend your hip in the other direction is probably more important for you to focus on. As you may know, there's a number of different ways that you can mobilize your hip flexors and the tissue at the front of your legs, whether it be a kneeling hip flexor stretch, which can be an amazing exercise. If you're someone who doesn't enjoy having your knee on the ground, you can absolutely do that on the side of your chair and still get a fantastic result. But for me, my preference for this is to do what we call the couch stretch. And all the couch stretch is we can use the same chair that's stiffened you up over all these years. What we want you to do is we can get you to place your knee into the back corner of the chair. And by starting with your back relatively sort of horizontal, keeping your back straight, we can gradually get you to extend upwards through your hip, trying to find any tightness through the front of your hip, potentially down through the front of your thigh. The goal for this exercise isn't to go past your comfortable spot and hope for the best. It's to find a version of this exercise that feels comfortable for you to begin with, maintaining this position and then trying to squeeze and tense up any of the tightnesses that you feel at the front of your hip. It's good to squeeze your glutes, tense everything up around that hip for 5 to 10 seconds so that when you stop tensing it, the tissue will give a little bit and then you should feel that you can go that little bit further into the stretch than what you could before. Repeating that process until you feel like you've had enough or you've stopped making change is an amazing way to open up the front of your hips. And clinically as a physiotherapist, restrictions through the front of your hips can have a genuine impact on the health and function of your knees, your hips for obvious reasons, and also the function of your lower back. So it goes without saying that if sitting down stiffens up the front of your hips quite easily, then we need to do something that combats that really well. And if you can get to the stage where eventually this position doesn't make you want to vomit and pass out because of how brutal it feels, and you're looking for a harder version of this, that we can get rid of the chair and do this down on the ground. And essentially, it's the exact same concept as the couch stretch on a chair. You just want to come up as far as you feel comfortable, going looking for anything that feels stiff, tight, and restricted in that area. And again, if this feels like it eventually becomes too easy and you want that little bit more benefit from the exercise, especially when trying to free up the hip joint capsule at the front of the hip and not just the soft tissue, then we can add a power band to this exact same exercise to get even more out of it. And how that looks is just taking a band, fixing it to something that's not going to move. We're going to place that band all the way up into the top of that hip crease and come back as far as you feel comfortable into a position that has a decent amount of stretch and then coming back up into the same shape as you were before. The band's fantastic at biasing the deepest structures at the front of your hip, like the hip capsule. We still want to take the same process of squeezing that soft tissue over the top, including anything that might be restricting you, relaxing, going that little bit further, and continuing that process until you stop making change or you get sick of the exercise. But the couch stretch and its variations are an amazing way to unglue those hips from the front and help you better buffer that sitting experience. So moving on from the hips, the next exercise that we want to get you to do is an exercise that helps you find and mobilize any restrictions that you may accrue through your spine. One of the tricky things about sitting is that sitting gives us a chance to be stuck in a certain posture for hours and hours and hours a day without necessarily realizing. And depending on the quality of your sitting shapes, if you tend to get a little bit slouchy through certain parts of your neck and back, wherever the hinges go is often where the load is directed towards. So if you kick a hinge into your spine and didn't realize it, but sat there for days, weeks, months, or years in that position, it's very likely that a certain part of your back might start to get a little bit stiffer and more restricted than other areas. So what you can do is if you can take a foam roller or a ball, we can go looking for some of those hidden restrictions, locate them, and then use the same technique to free that up to improve the mobility and the function of your spine. And how that looks, if you just take the ball, we can choose any part from the top of your neck at the base of your skull all the way down to the base of your back. A great place to start for a lot of people is sort of the base of the rib cage, or even that upper back area. So if we can start in that upper back area, we want you to be right in the middle, just let the ball come off to the side a little bit. Then all you literally want to do is just lie down on top of the ball. Now, the great thing about this exercise is you can absolutely do this while you're sitting if it's appropriate for you. It's really easy just to have the ball pressing into individual segments of your spine, asking those joints and surrounding soft tissues to give instead of get stiff. Because all the technique is that once you're right next to the spine, you just want to move the ball up a little bit or down a little bit. We need you to go looking for the areas that feel stiffer, tighter, harder, more restricted, more dense than the other side. Traditionally, for most people, one side feels a little bit softer, one side feels a little bit stiffer, based on some of the asymmetrical postures and shapes that we tend to get ourselves into the most throughout the day. So finding where those hidden handbrakes might be and gently and respectfully asking those soft tissue tightnesses and underlying joint stiffnesses to give can be a great way to keep some mobility in your spine. But ultimately, you want to spend a minute or two letting the ball gently press in. Then once you've had enough of that, you can move the ball down a little bit or up a little bit and just systematically work your way up and down your spine, looking for things that are meaningful to you. It's worthwhile, once you've done this maybe once, spend that first time taking 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, just systematically working through each joint to get a gauge of which ones you feel are the stiffest, the tightest, and the most restricted, so that the next time you do the exercise, you don't have to do them all over again. You can just go straight to the ones that felt the most meaningful, the most stiff, the most tight, the most restricted. They may not be tender, they may. The tenderness and the soreness isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for what feels harder, stiffer, and more restricted when compared to the other side. And then it goes without saying that if you know that you found a spot in your back that's particularly stiff, and that is also the spot in your back that you unknowingly have hinged through without realizing it, then it's really important that you find a way to roll up a towel or a cushion to fill that gap, to hold you back into a better position, to decrease the likelihood that those joints are going to want to keep staying stiff and stiffening back up again over time. Because if you are consigned to your chair more than you would like to be, then we still need to make sure that you've optimized the shapes and the postures that you're forced into as best as you feel you can, so that these exercises aren't as meaningful or you don't need to do them as often long term. So the final exercise that I think everyone needs to do to try and buffer the effects of day-to-day sitting is the across the body stretch. Now, the reason why this one's really important for a lot of people is, again, much like the hip joints, when we're sitting, it's very easy for us to get sucked into a position where our shoulders drop and roll forward through gravity. That can be just holding a phone, it can be using a mouse and keyboard, it can be holding a steering wheel. It doesn't really matter what it is, but as soon as your arms and your elbows get dragged away from your trunk and held there for days, weeks, months, or years, the weight of your arm and shoulder under gravity essentially pulls and hangs off the back of that shoulder for the entire time that you're there. And what that does is it has a tendency to tighten up and stiffen up a lot of the tissues at the back of that shoulder. And clinically as a physiotherapist, tightness in the back of that shoulder tends to be a movement that limits internal shoulder rotation, among other things. And the reason why this is important is because tightness at the back of the shoulder and limited internal rotation fundamentally forces you to change the orientation of your shoulder when you're doing things. The idea is that if you're in a perfect posture and you have your arm out to the side and you rotate your forearm down in that internally rotated position, you should be able to keep your shoulder back and achieve that end range position. But if you're missing a fair amount of internal shoulder range of motion because the back of your shoulder is tight, then if you can only get to here, but you need to get to here, the only way that your body can complete that task is if it deorientates your shoulder. So we see a lot of people with bicep tendinitises, impingements, rotator cuff dysfunction, and things like that are just missing basic fundamental range of motion from being in certain shoulder postures when sitting. So it makes sense if we can give you something like the across the body stretch, which aims to open up the back of that shoulder, then we can combat a lot of the accrued dysfunction that you may not have even realized that is there long term. And how this looks officially is, again, we want you to be up nice and tall, shoulders comfortably back, elbows straight, pull your arm across without feeling like your shoulder wants to follow it. And what we're looking for some of that tightness through the back side of that shoulder. And like we did with the couch stretch, what we want to do here is once you've found the version of your tightness that hits the spot that you feel you need to stretch, we need to make sure that we activate that tightness as best as we can. If you're capable enough, you can just physically connect with that muscle and tense it up in that position. Other people might need to push the extended arm into the bent arm without letting it move. So flare that muscle up for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, when you stop tensing, it'll give a little bit. You'll be able to get a little bit further into the stretch, and just keep repeating that process again until you either get sick of it or you've stopped making change in that session. And then what you should hopefully find is even just a quick simple retest should then feel like it's easier for you to internally rotate your shoulder, as an example, which means you've just fed some natural slack back into your shoulder and allowed your body to load up all the structures within your shoulder better than what you would have done before. And while there's a million different ways that you can free up the back of that shoulder, you can grab that same lacrosse ball that we put into your spine, you can pop that into the back. You can also get you to lean into the wall, roll that around, go looking for some of that tightness. You can stay there, you can let it press in for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, get tight, relax. If you want to get adventurous, you can use some active release techniques, or get your arm out into this position, keep the tension on there, gently try and internally rotate that shoulder to try and shear free that tissue at the back without allowing your shoulder to tilt forwards. The idea is that by freeing up that tissue, we're giving your shoulder a better environment to function within and better buffering some of the nasty things that might be unknowingly accrued from the day-to-day shapes and postures that you're getting into. And much like the spinal conversation that we just had, if you know that there's a part of your back that you may unknowingly hinge through when you sit, and by freeing it up and also trying to get out of that hinged position can be a long-term strategy to fix it. If you're spending your time working on the across the body stretch or jamming a ball in there, but you're still getting into those same shoulder postures day to day, then you may never get off this merry-go-round and ultimately give yourself the best chance of solving this problem long term. So obviously, if your spine's getting a little bit straighter and a little bit taller, we also want to make sure that you feel like you're pulling your shoulders back a little bit more. Again, the misconception is that you need to go back and down. The reason why this is a misconception is because gravity already drops you down and forwards. So if you're coming back and then down more, you're not really reversing the problem as it stands. So ideally, I just tell my patients, if you just take your shoulders comfortably back, they inevitably do go back and even up a little bit. We just want you to take the weight of your shoulders. We don't want you to feel like you're resting on your shoulders when you're doing the things that you need to do day to day. So as always, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful. As I mentioned, if you have any capacity to not sit as much, that will go a long way into helping your body feel and function better. But obviously, that's unrealistic for a lot of people. You can only optimize things so much before the environmental stuff gets in the way. Please look at how you are sitting when you are sitting, just to try and protect against some unnecessary specific issues that people tend to get. But give those 3 exercises a go, especially before you have to sit, obviously during that sitting process if you can, or afterwards if it's more convenient to you, just to give your body the best chance to buffer that sheer sitting load that you might be experiencing day to day. And if that was helpful, please let me know by leaving a comment down below, subscribe to the channel and like the video if you do appreciate this kind of content. But as always, I genuinely hope that that was helpful, and I hope to see you next time.